Hey, family, this is Dr. William Clark here for the Dr. William Clark podcast. Glad to be with you for another podcast. There's another conversation happening on social media that I wanted to talk about really quickly. And here's a question on the floor. The question is, should nonprofits, businesses have reserve funding in place? And I think this is a very sensitive topic for so many people because I think nonprofits struggle with viewing themselves as business operators and business owners. And I have noticed over my years of working in this industry that so many people view their work in a nonprofit as charity. They view their work as me giving back, all that good stuff. And frankly, that's good and that's true. But here's the reality, though. Operating a nonprofit is operating a business. You have to have income to actually do what you do. You have to have some sort of revenue that's consistently coming in so that you can pay staff and pay your overhead costs. And you have expenses, man. Yeah, you got expenses, and I think that people get it twisted because you hear the term nonprofit. So, for those of you who are unsure, unclear, the difference between a for-profit and nonprofit means you don't have money. What it simply means is when there's a profit at the end of a quarter or a fiscal year, the profits are not distributed to anyone because there is no owner of a nonprofit. When you have a for-profit company and you have let's say $100,000 profit at the end of the year, after all expenses are paid yourself, paid your staff, paid your bills, there's $100,000 profit. The owners of the LLC, the S corp, C corp, whatever, limited liability partnership, whatever you want to call it, they then split the revenue and spend it however they choose. That is the point of having a free market, being a capitalistic country, and you get to split that money. A nonprofit is a non-stock owning corporation. That means no one owns stock. If there's $100,000 at the end of the fiscal year, which if your nonprofit has $100,000 at the end of the fiscal year, you doing something right, right? But that aside, if you have $100,000 left, there's no splitting it with this person, that person. No, the money goes back into the nonprofit. It stays within the corporation. It stays it stays for the benefit of programs and customers and clients, etc. That is the key difference. I can't tell you over the years how many people have they heard that I work for a nonprofit and they said, so you don't make any money? So how do you pay your bills and how do you take care of your family and you having kids and all this other stuff? No, I work for a company that happens to be a nonprofit. That means no one owns the revenue or the profits at the end of the fiscal year. I still make a livable wage. I have health care. I have 401k. Doing pretty good. Can't complain. There are people who have been doing good for years working for nonprofits and governments the same way. But to answer the question in social media, should a nonprofit have funds in reserve? Yes. Why? Because 2001 happened. 2008 happened. 2020 happened. In all of these instances, the economy was tinkered with, money got tight, things in the culture in our community happened that just caused a ruckus. And it can cause financial breakdown for any organization. If you are living month to month in your organization and your funder can no longer support you, is no longer inviting you back to apply for funding, or a contract dissolves because it's no longer valid or relevant, how are you going to pay the bills? You still have good work to do. You still have staff to pay for. You still have rent to cover. You still have overhead costs. You still have bills to pay. You got to get paid. How can you do all that stuff if you don't have revenue coming in? Well, you do that when you have reserves, right? Since Corona has hit, particularly with churches, you hear this a lot with churches. A lot of churches were fretful about not having church because the business model of church largely depends upon people showing up, having an experience, and compensating the church for that, which we call tithing and offering. And don't get it twisted. This is not meant to diminish the church. Being a pastor, I'm very clear about what I'm saying, but I'm trying to talk in business terms, right? that there is a customer, the parishioner, that comes and pays for a service, which we call tithes and offerings, right? And that's how the church, through its donations and collections, pays for its bills, pays for its pastors, pays for its building, etc. When people don't show up, the fear was that people will stop paying their tithes and offering. And there were some pastors who were large enough and said, y'all stay home, continue to give online. We have enough reserve to take care of the church business. And that reserve has allowed them to tie over if they had a down week, down month because of Corona. And yet, some of these same churches are saying and reporting that, listen, man, our giving has maintained or increased because people just want to stay connected financially to the church, right? Then there are other churches who do not have reserves, who do not have anything in the bank and had to close their doors, and their people, before Corona, struggled to give online. During Corona, are still skeptical about giving online, and they don't have a reserve to keep things going. They have a mortgage note. They may have a pastor on payroll. They may have started a project, a roof, kitchen, whatever, and they still were behind on payments. And they were, before Corona hit, they were hoping, all right, this is going to be a good offering, so we're going to pay off that bill and that bill. And so the question about should nonprofits have reserves? Yeah. Many nonprofits during this time of the Corona are still operating because they have had solid reserves. And by God's grace, many funders have not called their funds back. Many funders have been persistent about figure out how we can continue to move forward virtually. How can you do what you do in a virtual environment? And we will continue to support you. That type of commitment from funders is invaluable. And thank you to all the funders. This doesn't take away the responsibility of the nonprofit, the church organization, the institution that is not a for-profit, to have reserves. You got to have reserves in the bank account. If you don't, you run the risk of closing down your business, closing down the nonprofit, right? You run the risk of people being laid off. You run the risk of you not having a job to come to. And worst off, you run the risk of your customers not having the quality, reliable services they've come to expect from you. In my Grant Writing 101 book, I talk a lot about business, revenue, etc. For obvious reasons, Grant Writing 101. But I pound into the head of the reader that it's all about the customer. Everything you do, every dollar you raise, it's about the customer. If you don't raise enough money to pay your bills and you can't pay rent, can't pay electricity, can't pay phone bills, you're leaving your customer out in the cold. Now, yes, there are competitors who'd be glad to step in and take over for you, and that's cool. But there's no one that can serve your customers like you. That's why you started your nonprofit. That's why you have a nonprofit. That's why you're on the board of a nonprofit. That's why you have cared for so many years and decided to forego a lucrative career and focus on community service oriented stuff and work in the nonprofit world. And if you don't have the resources in play to do what you do or a plan to build it up, you're putting your customers at risk. So this is Dr. William Clark for the Dr. William Clark podcast. All you guys stay safe out there. For the nonprofits out there, continue to do the good work you're doing virtually and figure it out. You're innovative. You're intuitive. I'm sure innovations will come your way. See you in the next episode.